I invite you to open up your copy of God's Word this morning to Ezekiel chapter 1, verses 4 through 28, as we continue our new series, Ezekiel, God's Glory, Dry Bones, and New Hearts. This morning I've entitled the sermon, Chariots of Fire and the Divine Throne. Now, we are entering into the period of graduation season all throughout our country at various different levels, but one of the graduation ceremonies that I want to consider with you this morning is the graduation ceremony from West Point. Graduates from West Point will move on from their 4-year experience in college, and they will be commissioned. They will have a commissioning ceremony in which they become second lieutenant officers in the United States military. These are very special ceremonies. I have a quote from this ceremony of the attention to order that is being given by the officer that is commissioning the new graduate. It says, "Attention to order. The President of the United States has reposed special trust and confidence in the patriotism, valor, fidelity, and professional abilities of the first, middle, and last name of the graduate. In view of these qualities and his demonstrated potential for increased responsibility, he therefore is promoted in the United States Army to the rank of second lieutenant effective 28th of May, 2023, by the orders of the Secretary of the Army, signed Christine E. Wormuth." Those words will be stated by many who are graduating and being commissioned. About halfway through the ceremony of those orders, designated personal pins will be pinned to the second lieutenant bars of the graduate. And then an oath will be responded to by the graduate. The oath will be, "I, first, middle, and last name of the graduate, having been appointed an officer in the Army of the United States in the grade of second lieutenant, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which I am about to enter, so help me God." Then after those words of the oath, there will be a first salute. It is called the silver dollar salute, in which the newly commissioned officer will receive their first salute as an officer with their one, typically it's the one who has given them the commission, and then they will hand the officer a silver dollar that they will have in their pocket or their back pocket, and that will signal the very first salute that they received. Now today, our text in Ezekiel has a similar commissioning service. There is elements to the commissioning of the prophet Ezekiel that has a form to it, a formality that goes back and forth, just like this commissioning service of the West Point graduate. But the essential element of the commissioning service of Ezekiel is not a commission and then an oath and then a salute. The essential element that we will see is a personal encounter with the glory of the Lord. That's what we see in Ezekiel chapter 1. The essential element of the commissioning of the prophet Ezekiel is a personal encounter with the glory of the Lord. Now, just by way of review where we're at, we started this series last week and we noted that Ezekiel in verse 1, he's a 30-year-old man who has been living in exile in Babylon for 5 years now. When he was 25 years old, he was taken off into Babylon, and he is in his 30th year of life, and that is significant because he is a priest, and in the 30th year of the priest's life, he was commissioned to begin his service in the temple. So now, here is a man who had devoted his entire life to become a priest, and in this year, he's supposed to be serving in the temple, but he is far away in exile in Babylon, and he's sitting by a canal, by a river, and he's meditating upon the Lord. And perhaps one of the things he's meditating upon is all of the failed plans of his life. He's meditating upon the experience or the question of, where is the Lord? Indeed, the mighty deeds of Yahweh, who brought his people out of the land of Egypt by his mighty outstretched arm. The God who split the Red Sea and led his people and came to Mount Sinai. That God did those deeds 900 years ago for Ezekiel. Have you considered what 900 years of history is like in a country? We're celebrating Memorial Day this weekend, celebrating 250 years of history. 3 times that length of history. Ezekiel is reflecting upon those things that happened way back in the past, but the events that are happening in his day, the events he's wondering, where is the Lord? Indeed, the Lord has allowed Jerusalem to be besieged, for the foreign armies to come in and to kick all of the people out of the land. And he's sitting on a river or on a canal in Babylon meditating. And then all of a sudden he encounters a jaw-dropping experience. The sky above him splits open and he sees something. He sees a divine vision comes to him of the glory of the Lord present with him in Babylon, in a foreign country. This glory is overwhelming, and it is essential to the commissioning of Ezekiel as God's prophet to his people. Here's our big idea this morning for the sermon. Our big idea is that in Ezekiel chapter 1, we see Ezekiel sees an incredible vision while in exile in Babylon of the glory of the Lord on the throne, riding a chariot, guided by mighty cherubim, coming on the clouds of a thunderstorm. Now the text works backwards from that big idea. So the text this morning works in verses 4, we're going to see the storm, the thunderstorm. Then in verses 5 through 14, we see the mighty cherubim. Then in verses 15 through 21, we see the chariot. Then in verses 22 through 28, we see the throne, the platform throne, and finally the sovereign on the throne. And then the very last half verse, we're going to see Ezekiel's response to the glory that he sees. And that's where we are going to link into our response this very morning. So look with me in our text, starting in verse 4, we see the storm. Ezekiel sees a vision of a huge thunderstorm approaching from the north. Verse 4 reads, I looked, and there was a whirlwind coming from the north, a huge cloud with fire flashing back and forth and brilliant light all around it. And in the center of the fire, there was a gleam like amber. Ezekiel's vision begins with this huge storm that bears down from the north. Now, the north is where Judah's enemies had traditionally come from in the form of the Assyrians, when the Assyrians came and conquered the 10 northern tribes of Israel, and now where Babylon came from. They came from the north. But now, it's not these pagan armies that's coming from the north. It's a terrible thunderstorm. Lightning is flashing all around, and in the center of the storm, there is this burning fire. The fire and lightning points to the fact that this is no common thunderstorm. In fact, it is a storm that is bearing forth a theophany, a coming of the Lord as the one who is the divine warrior. The imagery of such a storm can be found in Psalm 18, verses 9 through 14, which says, He bent the heavens and came down, total darkness beneath his feet. He rode on the cherub and flew. Soaring on the wings of the wind, he made darkness his hiding place, dark storm clouds his canopy around him. And from the radiance of his presence, his clouds swept onward with hail and blazing coals. The Lord thundered from heaven. The Most High made his voice heard. He shot his arrows and scattered them. He hurled lightning bolts and routed them. So it's a description of a theophany, of a divine warrior coming on a storm. And this powerful storm of fire, it can be found all the way back in the book of Exodus. Indeed, when God was bringing out his people through the Red Sea and bringing them out into the wilderness, God led his people through a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day. And then they came to Mount Sinai, and when they rested at Mount Sinai, the Lord descended on Mount Sinai, and in an incredible storm descended upon the mountain. There was thunder and lightning. In fact, the people thought they were going to die in the presence of this storm that came. But next, here in our text, we're going to see Ezekiel squinting at this storm, and he begins to start seeing more and more coming with this storm. At first, all he sees is the clouds and the lightning that is coming. But then in the middle of that, did you see that there was something gleaming like amber, and his blurry, squinty eyes is going to start picking up images from this storm that is riding at him. So Ezekiel sees something in the storm, and what he sees in verses 5 through 14 are these cherubim, these angels. So Ezekiel sees 4 awesome angels coming on the clouds of the storm. Read with me in verse 5. It says here, the likeness of 4 living creatures came from it, and this was their appearance. They looked something like a human, but each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the hooves of a calf, sparkling like the gleam of polished bronze. They had human hands under their wings and on their 4 sides, and all 4 of them had faces and wings. Now their wings were touching. The creatures did not turn as they moved. Each one went straight ahead. Their faces looked something like a face of a human, and each of them had 4. Each of the 4 had the face of a lion on the right, a face of an ox on the left, and the face of an eagle. This is what their faces were like. Their wings were spread upward. Each had 2 wings touching that of another, and the 2 wings were covering its body. Each creature went straight ahead. Wherever the Spirit wanted to go, they went without turning as they moved. The likeness of the living creatures was like the appearance of blazing coals of fire, or like torches. Fire was moving back and forth between the living creatures. It was bright, with lightning coming out of it. The creatures were darting back and forth like flashes of lightning. Ezekiel has never seen anything like this, and Ezekiel is having a tough time putting what he sees with his eyes into words for us to try to give us some pictures. And I don't know about you, but I have a tough time going from the word pictures and getting something in my brain. I have a tough time trying to envision this. Artists have for centuries tried to draw these figures for us. But let me try to describe what I see going on here. He's seeing these awesome, mighty creatures. They're only described as living creatures here in chapter 1. Like I said, it's kind of blurry. He's barely getting it out. In chapter 10 of Ezekiel, we'll see them again, and he names them specifically as cherubim. And cherubim, this is the 3rd time we've encountered cherubim in the Bible so far. In the Bible, we first encounter a cherubim in Genesis chapter 3 at the Garden of Eden. When God kicks out Adam and Eve out of the garden, he places at the front of that garden cherubim. And then there's this flaming sword keeping them from entering back into the garden to take the tree of life and entering back from the presence of the Lord. So we see that these cherubim in Genesis 3 are guarding the presence of the Lord. Then we don't hear anything else about the cherubim. We don't know what the cherubim look like in Genesis 3. We just hear that there's some angel figure. And then we don't hear anything until Exodus chapter 25, when God is describing the Holy of Holies and the Ark of the Covenant. He says that on top of the Holy of Holies, or on top of the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy of Holies, you are to place these cherubim, and they have wings that spread out and touch. And on the touching wings of the cherubim, that's where my presence will dwell. Then we don't hear anything else about the cherubim until Ezekiel chapter 1. When was Exodus written? Around 1400 BC under Moses. When is Ezekiel being written? At the end of the 590 right now. 593 in this. Hundreds and hundreds of years later, we finally get a picture of what one of these cherubim look like. And they are awesome creatures. It's jaw-dropping to consider the descriptions of these creatures. In fact, uh, Ezekiel is having a tough time putting his vision into words. The Hebrew here is some of the roughest Hebrew in all of the Old Testament. Hebrew chapter 1, or Ezekiel 1, it's notoriously difficult because it's like slurred speech here for this man. He's repeating himself over and over, and he's using those words like this, and it kind of looks like this, and he's maybe like this, and he's trying to put his description into words. But what he sees first in verses 5 through 8 is a composite angel form. So they're composite bodies. They are the body of a human. They have some wings, and then they have 4 heads with 4 faces on them. A face of a human, a face of a lion, a face of an ox, and a face of an eagle. Now, for us, this is really confusing. For Ezekiel's day, it's not actually. This is the composite form of every single tribe, or every single ancient people group outside of Egypt. Outside of Egypt, if there was some composite body form of an animal with a human being, it was one of these 3 animals, all throughout the ancient Middle East. And these 3 animals represent something significant. The lion is the highest wild animal. The ox is the highest domesticated animal, and the eagle is the highest bird. The lion represents strength and dignity. The ox represents fertility in the ancient Near Eastern cultures. It represented the highest domesticated animal. The eagle represents the most stately of birds, the swiftest. And then there's this face of a human who is made in the image of God. What is being represented to us is this cherubim is not like any of us. And in fact, it is the highest and greatest combination of all the created world. The highest wild animal, the highest domesticated animal, the highest bird, and the highest human. It has the best of all of that. It is some composite, great, incredible form. And that's what we see here. Then he kind of double clicks in verse 8b through 11 to describe their faces more, describing these animals. One really unique detail I learned from the commentator Daniel Block is that outside of Egypt, these are the only animals that the cultures put together with humans. And so this culture, this is something that is typical for the iconography of the culture. But then in verse 11, B through 14, he's going to double click in and look at their wings. And these wings are incredible. First, he describes wings extended above them such that they touch each other. Not their own individual wings, but the wings between this angel and this angel. They reach up and they touch. That's why in the Holy of Holies on the Ark of the Covenant, it was the 2 angels and their wings extending to create where the mercy seat was. And so these wings are stretching up above them, but then they have a second set of wings that is covering them. It's like the seraphim. They're a different set of angels. They had 6 wings, but they're covering their body with these wings. And then putting it together, when they moved about, wherever they wanted to move, they could move in whatever direction. When I was reading this, I was trying to comprehend verse 12. Each creature went straight ahead wherever the Spirit wanted to go. They went without turning as they moved. And I was trying to think, how do you turn without the move? What I think's going on here is it's describing this is like a 0-turn mower, and not like the mower that I grew up on, where you had to take that big wide turn as you went around. This, wherever they want to go, they can pivot and they can go. There's no rounded edges here. There's no places that they can't get to. Remember those mowers and you were always so frustrated because you couldn't get the corners and stuff? These angels can go all the way up to the corners. And then they can pivot and they can move all the way back. Wherever they go, wherever they're pleased to go, the Spirit wants them to go, they go. And then it just describes them here in more brilliance. Ezekiel finishes by describing these awesome creatures, saying that they are like burning coals of fire. And then they dart back and forth like lightning. As awesome as these creatures are, the text moves on really quickly. They are not the pinnacle of the vision that Ezekiel sees. So he sees these creatures, but then he sees what's below these creatures. And what's below these creatures in verses 15 through 21 is a chariot. And Ezekiel sees the four cherubim are guiding a chariot with four wheels that can go anywhere and that sees everything. So look at how he describes these wheels of this chariot in verse 15. When I looked at the living creatures, there was one wheel on the ground and beside each of the four-faced creatures. The appearance of the wheel and their craftsmanship was like the gleam of beryl, which is just an ancient stone there. And then all four of them had the same likeness. Their appearance and craftsmanship was like a wheel within a wheel. When they moved, they went in any of the four directions and without turning as they moved. Their four rims were tall and awe-inspiring, completely covered with eyes. When the living creature moved, the wheels moved beside them, and when the creatures rose from the earth, the wheels also rose. And wherever the Spirit wanted to go, the creatures went in the direction the Spirit was moving. The wheels rose alongside them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. And then when the creatures moved, the wheels moved. When the creatures stopped, the wheels stopped. And when the creatures rose from the earth, the wheels rose alongside them, for the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. So in this section, the cherubim are driving a chariot, which is described in detail by focusing on the chariot's wheels. Now, these wheels are simply spectacular, and words are straining to describe them here. Perhaps there's something like a gyroscope, or maybe they're like concentric wheels within a wheels. Artists have tried to portray them. I can't put this into actual art, but what I can note is that verse 17 says the wheels move in every single direction, and then verse 18 says the wheels are completely covered with eyes. And what I think I can take from that is that this chariot can go anywhere where it wants to go. So it's omnipresent. There's no place where it can't go, and it's covered with eyes. So it's omniscient. There's not anything that it can't see. So this chariot, wherever it moves, it goes wherever it wants to go in the world, and it sees everything that it wants to see. Wherever the Spirit moves it, it's energized and moved by the Spirit. The chariot is going to go, and wherever the Spirit wants to stop, the chariot is going to stop. So we have cherubim, and we have a chariot. But now the awesome, strange descriptions of those things don't even compare to what Ezekiel sees next. His eyes move from what is below the chariot, the wheels, to what is above the chariot. What is above the cherubim? It's this platform, and there's a throne, and then there's somebody sitting on the throne, the king, the sovereign. So Ezekiel sees a radiant one who looks like a human sitting on the throne in verses 22 through 28. Read with me here, verse 22. Over the heads of the living creatures, the likeness of an expanse was spread out. So that word expanse is another word for a platform. So there's something above the living creatures that they're holding or they're holding up. So there's an expanse over their heads. It gleamed like awe-inspiring crystal. And under the expanse, their wings extended toward one another. They each also had two wings covering their bodies. When they moved, I heard the sound of their wings like the roar of a huge torrent, like the voice of the Almighty, and a sound of tumult like the sound of an army. When they stopped, they lowered their wings. A voice came from above the expanse over their heads. When they stopped, they lowered thear wings. See, hear that repeating going on? That it's just struggling through to see what he's seeing here. Something like a throne with the appearance of lapis lazuli. That's just it's an ancient stone that looks like a sapphire. Your translation might have sapphire. They didn't have sapphire in this area, so it's some blue-like stone here, lapis lazuli. And then it was above the expanse over their heads. On the throne, high above, was someone who looked like a human. From what seemed to be his waist up, I saw a gleam like amber, with what looked like fire enclosing it all around. From what seemed to be his waist down, I also saw what looked like fire. There was a brilliant light all around him. The appearance of the brilliant light was all around was like that of a rainbow in a cloud on a rainy day. This was the appearance of the likeness of the Lord's glory. So Ezekiel here moved from thinking about the wheels and thinking about this weird four-headed or four-faced individual. He doesn't spend more time on the cherubim, doesn't spend more time on the chariot. His attention draws to what is above. And as he looks up to what is on top of the chariot, he sees a platform, an expanse that the cherubim are holding above their heads. Consider maybe a Middle Eastern sultan with servants that are carrying him around on poles on their shoulders. And there's a platform, and then he's seated on top of that, and they're walking him through the streets. So the cherubim are holding up something, and there's a platform above him, an expanse. The cherubim's wings are noted here as making a rushing sound like the sound of an army. This is a powerful sound. The sound of an army. Think of thousands of people chattering about in verse 24. And then another sound breaks through, and the singular sound in verse 25 that breaks through is louder than the voice of an army of men. This is incredible here. Verse 25 says, a voice came from the expanse above their heads, and when they stopped, they lowered their wings. This voice can cause all the rest of the voices or the noise from their wings to stop in its place. The second the voice that is above the expanse, above the platform speaks, everything else stops. Everything goes seemingly into slow motion here. And then in verse 26, it takes us from hearing the voice to seeing a gleaming throne. This lapis lazuli, this brilliant sapphire-like precious stone is gleaming in seemingly the sun, but then this throne only has a split second of time. It only has half a verse of focus on us. Thinking about this, if you've been in a place, if you've been over in England, or if you've seen the gleaming gold all around, or you've seen the crown jewels that are focused on, everyone wants to go and spend time looking at these precious jewels. Ezekiel spends about a half verse thinking about something that probably would drop all of our jaws and cause us to just stare at it all day long, right? A throne that is gleaming with sapphire all around. Have any of you ever seen a radiant blue throne in our lifetimes? No one has something like this. But what the throne is not important. Immediately we see who is on the throne. And so the second half of verse 26 says, on the throne, high above, was someone who looked like a human. Now, this is incredible. Ezekiel is able to look up and to see the king, the sovereign, who is sitting on the throne. And this one who is sitting on the throne, he's like a radiant human being. Verse 27 says, from his waist up, he gleams like amber. Now note, where did we see the gleam like amber already in this story? Remember back in verse 4? The thunderstorm that is coming, and in the center of that thunderstorm, there was something that gleamed like amber. Well, now Ezekiel's eyes, it's almost like he's got binoculars on that thunderstorm, and now he's seeing what is that? What was it that was gleaming like amber in the center of that thunderstorm? It's the one that is on the throne. And from the waist up, he's gleaming like amber or like bronze. And then there's this something like fire enclosed all around him, but then his waist down looks like fire. And there's this brilliant light all around him, and it's this brilliant light like the light of a rainbow. It is an interesting note. The last time in our text in the Old Testament where we see a brilliant rainbow shows up is right after the flood. in which God reminds his people, Noah and his family, of his commitment to his people despite the judgment that he brought in the flood. So I think it's unique that God brings a rainbow for Ezekiel to see in the midst of his judgment coming against them. He reinstills by this vision of his glory the commitment that he has to his people, the covenant commitment that he will be their God and they will be his people. But more importantly than seeing this rainbow, we find this detail at the end of verse 28. We find this detail. This was the appearance of the likeness of the Lord's glory. Ezekiel saw the glory of the Lord, and when he saw the glory of the Lord, it showed up like a human. Now, theologically, this is very significant. This human on the throne, I believe, is the second person of the Trinity. A pre-incarnation experience of Jesus. Theologian John Gill comments on this passage saying that it's a symbol of Christ's kingly power and authority, who in the person that sat upon it, as he is God, he is on the same throne with his Father. As mediator, he is the King of the saints, and was so from eternity. He exercised his office before his incarnation, and as he was prophesied of as a king, he came as one. Though little known and his kingdom was not with observation, upon his ascension he was declared Lord and Christ, and he will appear on a throne when he shall come to judge the world, and particularly in the new Jerusalem when it comes down in the new heavens and the new earth. There are other places in the Old Testament where we see such theophanies that come in bodily human form. Notably, in our study in Daniel, we saw it 3 times. In Daniel chapter 3, we saw in verse 25 when Nebuchadnezzar is looking into the fiery furnace where he threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He looks in and he sees a 4th person walking around. Verse 25 reads, he exclaimed, "Look, I see 4 men, not tied, walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Then we saw in Daniel chapter 7, verses 9 and 10, and verses 13 and 14, another like the Son of Man approaching God. Reads in verse 9, "As I kept watching, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white like snow, and the hair on his head was like the whitest wool. His throne was flaming fire. Its wheels were blazing fire. A river of fire was flowing, coming out of his presence. Thousands upon thousands served him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was convened, and the books were opened. And as I continued watching in the night visions, suddenly one like a son of man was coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days, and he was escorted before him, and he was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, so that those of every people, nation, and language should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will not be destroyed." This picture in Daniel is one of the Ancient of Days sitting on his throne, and the Ancient of Days giving his throne away. He gives his dominion to one that is like the Son of Man riding on the clouds. Finally, we saw one last image of this man in Daniel, Daniel chapter 10. Verses 5 and 6, "I looked up, and there was a man dressed in linen with a belt of gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like beryl. His face was like the brilliance of lightning. His eyes were like flaming torches. His arms and feet were like the gleam of polished bronze, and the sound of his words were like the sound of a multitude." Daniel had Ezekiel's writings. Daniel knew the prophet Ezekiel, and I think Daniel here in Daniel 10 is describing this man that he is seeing, is describing it through the language that Ezekiel saw when he saw this man. And so he sees somebody from the waist up that has polished bronze, gleams like amber. He sees somebody that his voice is like the sound of a multitude. And he sees this one who is radiant in brilliance of light. Now, Ezekiel and Daniel are not the only one to see this second person of the Trinity in this way. In Revelation chapter 1, John the Revelator, he looks up and he sees Jesus Christ, and he describes Jesus Christ in this way. He says here, starting in verse 12, "Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking with me, and having turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. In the middle of the lampstands, I saw one like a son of man, clothed in a robe, reaching to the feet, and girded across his chest with a golden sash. His head and his hair were like white like wool, like snow, and his eyes were like the flame of a fire. His feet were like burnished bronze. And when it has been made to glow in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of many waters. And in his right hand he held 7 stars. Out of his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword, and his face was like the sun shining in its strength." The man that John saw here sounds awfully like the man that Daniel saw in Daniel 10. Sounds awfully like the man that Ezekiel sees in Ezekiel chapter 1. So I think Ezekiel is capturing an encounter with the glory of the Lord in the person of the second person of the Trinity. Now, how does Ezekiel respond to this vision? Vision of a thunderstorm with cherubim, with chariots, with a throne, and with someone sitting on the throne in human form, appearance of the Lord's glory. Look at the end of verse 28, 28b, the response. Ezekiel falls flat on his face before the glory of the Lord. Verse 28b reads, "When I saw it, I fell face down and heard a voice speaking." Ezekiel gets as low as he can get, humbly on his face before the Lord. He sees the glory, and he gets his face in the dirt. Now, friends, I want you to consider one more thing this morning. God is still in the business of revealing to his people the glory of the Lord in the person of Jesus Christ. And his people need to be in the business of responding exactly like Ezekiel responded here. Falling on their face before the Lord and humbly acknowledging his glory. You see, God sent his Son, Jesus Christ. We saw a vision here in Ezekiel. A thunderstorm on a chariot, on a platform, on a throne, and Ezekiel had to blur his eyes out, and he was straining at words trying to describe this. But then the one who was on the throne came down to become a man. And he revealed his glory to us. Indeed, John chapter 1, the same John that sees this vision in Revelation wrote these words. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And he was with God in the beginning. All things were created through him, and apart from him, one thing was created that has been created. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. And light shines in the darkness, yet the darkness did not overcome." Describes this light. It says, "He was in the world, and the world was created through him, yet the world did not recognize him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, he gave the right to be the children of God, to those who would believe in his name, who were born not of natural descent, or of the will of flesh, or of the will of man, but of God. Now here's the key verse, verse 14. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we observed his glory. The glory as the one and only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. We have observed the glory of the Lord in the face of Jesus Christ. We observe the glory of the Lord as he became a man, but I'll tell you where we observe the glory of the Lord most peculiarly. We observe the glory of the Lord on the cross. Because it was on the cross that the Lord of glory died for you and I. And then, having observed the Lord of glory on the cross, the Lord of glory was raised up from the dead on the third day, and he ascended on high. And when he ascended on high, he was given the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus, what should happen? We fall on our face. Every knee should bow and every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. So what we need to see in Ezekiel 1 is we need to see Ezekiel encountering the glory of the Lord and falling on his face. And what we need this morning is we need to see the glory of the Lord in the person and work of Jesus Christ. And we need to bow the knee and worship. We're right about to do that. Our closing song this morning might be new to you in our church, but it's a simple song and it's a beautiful song. It's a song that just sings, Jesus, thank you. So I invite you to sing, maybe on your face this morning. Maybe you need to kneel. But how will we respond to the glory of the Lord? Maybe you need to respond to this vision of the glory of the Lord this morning by falling on your knees for the first time. Metaphorically or literally. Falling on your knees and repenting of your sin and saying, I want to trust you. Did you hear in John chapter 1, Jesus came to his own, but his own people didn't receive him. Don't be somebody who sees the vision of the glory of the Lord this morning, but walks out not receiving him. Instead, be the person that it describes. To all those who did receive him, what did God do? He gave them the right to become the children of God, to those who believe in his name. And so may today be the day that you believe in his name and you inherit the right to be a child of God. You see his glory, you bow the knee, and you become a part of his family. Might today be the day of salvation. Would you pray with me?